Sometimes the biggest controversies in NASCAR don't begin with a failed inspection or an official penalty. They begin with a number that doesn't seem to fit. That is the question now surrounding the discussion about Kyle Larson's straight-line performance and the attention Shane van Gisbergen has reportedly given to the available data. The issue isn't simply whether one driver is faster than another. Racing is full of performance differences. Teams spend millions of dollars searching for tiny advantages in setup, aerodynamics, tire management, and engine efficiency. The real question is where innovation ends and a possible rules problem begins. According to the concerns raised in the story, SVG noticed performance patterns that appeared unusual when compared with other cars. The differences were subtle, particularly in the way Larson's car seemed to maintain momentum and speed under certain conditions. On their own, those numbers don't prove wrongdoing, but repeated patterns can attract attention, and that's where this situation becomes more interesting. In modern NASCAR, data is almost as valuable as horsepower. Teams study speed traces, throttle application, acceleration, fuel usage, and engine behavior constantly. A small difference repeated over dozens of laps can become a major competitive advantage. For SVG, the numbers apparently raised enough questions to look deeper, and once a rival begins examining another team's performance closely, the conversation can quickly move beyond the racetrack, because this isn't just about who has the faster car. It's about technology, competition, regulation, and one difficult question NASCAR eventually has to answer. When a team finds a performance advantage that nobody else has discovered, is it smart engineering or something the rulebook was never meant to allow? To understand why this debate gained so much attention, you have to look beyond the data and examine the relationship between the two drivers. Shane van Gisbergen and Kyle Larson represent two very different paths into NASCAR success. Larson is one of the most naturally versatile drivers in American motorsport, while SVG arrived from Australia with an established international reputation and the challenge of proving himself on unfamiliar oval tracks. That difference alone created competition. But competition becomes much more intense when two drivers repeatedly find themselves racing in the same space. Over the past several seasons, SVG and Larson have built a relationship defined by respect, aggressive racing, and occasional frustration. On road courses, SVG has demonstrated the strengths that made him a champion before arriving in NASCAR. Larson, meanwhile, remains one of the drivers capable of challenging almost anyone across different types of circuits. When talented drivers race closely, they study each other. They notice braking points, they notice throttle application, they notice how another driver protects tires, exits corners, and builds speed down a straightaway. What looks ordinary to a fan watching from the grandstands can look completely different to someone reviewing onboard footage and performance data. That is why the questions surrounding Larson's speed became more significant. This wasn't simply an outside observer making a random claim. The story centers on a direct competitor who understands what elite performance is supposed to look like. SVG has raced against world-class drivers and worked with highly sophisticated racing organizations. If something repeatedly appeared different, it made sense that he would want answers. Of course, rivalry can also influence perception. A driver fighting another competitor for positions, points, and recognition may naturally pay closer attention to that rival's strengths. That doesn't automatically make the concerns wrong, but it does make the situation more complicated. And in NASCAR, complications rarely stay private for long. Once competition turns into curiosity, curiosity can become investigation. And when that investigation involves performance data, every small difference suddenly becomes worth examining. In modern NASCAR, suspicion rarely begins with a dramatic discovery. More often, it starts with a small inconsistency that appears again and again. That is what makes performance data so important. A driver can feel that another car is faster, but instinct alone means very little in a technical investigation. Teams need measurable evidence. They look at onboard footage, speed traces, throttle application, acceleration zones, lap time trends, and the way a car behaves over an entire run. The goal is simple: determine whether a difference is normal or whether it deserves a closer look. In this case, the concern surrounding Larson's performance reportedly became more interesting because the pattern appeared repeatedly. Instead of focusing on one lap or one race, the analysis moved toward comparisons across different sessions and track conditions. That matters because a single fast lap can have countless explanations. Fresh tires, clean air, track position, driver execution, or a better setup can all create unusual numbers. But when the same advantage appears repeatedly, analysts start asking different questions. Where does the extra performance appear? Does it happen during acceleration, at maximum speed, during a specific engine RPM range? Does the pattern remain consistent when other variables change? These are the questions that turn ordinary competition into technical analysis. For SVG and his team, the reported concern was not necessarily one dramatic number. It was the consistency of the difference. Small advantages seemed to appear in similar situations, particularly when Larson's car was building speed. That doesn't automatically point to anything improper. Great teams often produce data that other teams cannot immediately explain. Better engineering, more efficient setups, stronger execution, and superior driver input can all create advantages that look unusual from the outside. But unexplained performance has value as well. It tells competitors where to investigate. And once engineers begin comparing multiple races, multiple runs, and multiple data points, a simple question can develop into something much larger. What started as curiosity about speed can become a search for the system responsible for producing it. That is the moment when the story changes. Because now, the discussion is no longer about whether Larson was fast. It's about understanding exactly why. In NASCAR, 2 miles per hour can sound insignificant. On paper, it barely looks like a competitive advantage. But at racing speed, a small difference can completely change the economics of a race. Consider what happens when one car reaches the end of a straightaway carrying slightly more speed than the cars around it. That driver can defend a position more easily, complete a pass with less risk, or force a competitor to use more of their equipment trying to respond. And the advantage doesn't happen only once, it can repeat on every lap. That is why teams invest so heavily in finding marginal gains. A fraction of improvement in engine response, corner exit, drag, or fuel efficiency may seem minor in isolation. Across an entire race, however, those small improvements can influence track position, strategy, tire wear, and ultimately championship points. The same principle exists in finance. A small percentage difference in efficiency may not transform a business overnight, but repeated consistently over hundreds of transactions, that advantage can become substantial. Racing works in much the same way. NASCAR teams are constantly searching for improvements that compound over time. Straight-line performance is particularly valuable because it affects several parts of the race at once. More acceleration can improve restarts. Higher speed can make passing easier. Better momentum can help a driver escape traffic. Even a modest advantage can change how aggressively competitors have to defend their position. That is why the questions surrounding Larson's performance attracted attention. If a car consistently appears to gain even a small advantage under similar conditions, rival teams naturally want to understand the source. It could be superior engineering, it could be setup, it could be driver technique, or it could simply be a combination of factors that is difficult to see from outside the organization. The important point is that small gains are rarely small when they are repeatable. In a sport decided by fractions of a second, the difference between first and fifth may not come from one spectacular innovation. It may come from dozens of tiny advantages working together. And once competitors believe one of those advantages cannot be easily explained, the investigation begins. The larger issue behind this debate goes far beyond one driver, one team, or one unusual performance pattern. Modern NASCAR is becoming increasingly dependent on technology. For decades, fans could look inside a garage and see where much of the performance came from. Engines, suspension components, bodywork, and mechanical adjustments were visible. Teams still searched for advantages, but many of those advantages existed in physical parts that inspectors could measure and examine. Today, that picture is more complicated. Software now plays an important role in how modern racing systems operate. Electronic control units, engine calibrations, data analysis, and digital monitoring systems have added an entirely new layer to competition. The fastest solution is no longer always something you can hold in your hand. Sometimes it can be a setting, sometimes it can be a calibration, and sometimes it can be a line of software that changes how an existing system behaves. That creates a difficult challenge for NASCAR. The organization must allow teams to innovate while ensuring that innovation does not undermine competitive fairness. If the rules are too restrictive, teams lose opportunities to develop better solutions. But if the regulations cannot keep pace with technology, competitors may discover advantages that inspectors struggle to identify. This is not unique to NASCAR. The same challenge exists across Formula One, aviation, financial markets, and major technology industries. As systems become more complex, oversight becomes more dependent on understanding software, data, and algorithms. In racing, that creates an important shift. Inspecting a physical component is relatively straightforward. Inspecting software behavior can be far more difficult. Two cars may look identical from the outside while operating differently because of approved or unapproved digital settings. That is why technical controversies are likely to become more complicated in the future. The question is no longer simply, what part was changed? Because once competitors stop trusting where those boundaries are, the entire system becomes harder to defend. The next race becomes more interesting when a technical debate follows the drivers onto the track. Before the controversy, fans would have watched SVG and Larson for the usual reasons. Two highly talented competitors, different racing backgrounds, and the possibility of another intense battle. Now, every performance comparison could attract additional attention. That is especially true at Daytona. Super speedway racing places enormous importance on momentum, drafting, timing, and track position. A driver's success is influenced by far more than raw engine performance. The ability to work with teammates, build runs, manage the draft, and make decisions within seconds can completely change the outcome. That makes the next chapter of this story even more complicated. If Larson demonstrates strong, straight-line performance, some fans may immediately connect it to the technical questions already circulating. If SVG outperforms him, others may argue that the controversy was exaggerated from the beginning. But racing rarely provides such simple answers. One result cannot prove or disprove a complicated technical theory. Performance changes from track to track, setup to setup, and race to race. That is why official analysis matters more than public interpretation. Still, perception has already changed. The rivalry now has another layer. Every restart, drafting battle, and side-by-side run between SVG and Larson could carry more meaning than it would have before. The two drivers don't need to mention the controversy for fans and media to remember it. That is the power of a public debate. Even if NASCAR eventually finds nothing unusual, the questions have already changed how people view the competition. And if officials decide a deeper review is necessary, Daytona could become the first major race where the entire garage is watching not just who wins, but how the performance looks. For SVG, the race represents another opportunity to prove himself in NASCAR's competitive environment. For Larson, it is an opportunity to let performance speak for itself. And for NASCAR, it is a reminder that every new technical controversy creates pressure for answers. Because once a rivalry becomes connected to questions about technology, the competition is no longer limited to the finish line. This controversy ultimately points to a much bigger issue than one driver, one team, or one unusual performance pattern. Modern motorsport is changing. The competitive advantage is no longer found only in horsepower, suspension, aerodynamics, or mechanical preparation. Increasingly, performance comes from data, software, simulation, calibration, and the ability to understand complex regulations better than the competition. That creates opportunity, but it also creates risk. Innovation should be rewarded. Teams that invest in better engineers, smarter systems, and more efficient process should have the chance to gain an advantage. That is part of competition. But innovation only works when every competitor trusts that the boundaries are clear and enforced equally. That is the challenge facing NASCAR. The sport must continue allowing technology to evolve while making sure its inspection and regulatory systems evolve at the same speed. If the rules cannot keep up with the technology, questions will continue to grow. And once competitors begin questioning whether everyone is operating under the same standards, trust becomes harder to rebuild. The situation involving SVG and Larson represents that larger tension. At this stage, speculation is not the same as proof. An unusual data pattern does not automatically establish a violation. A strong performance does not automatically mean a team has crossed the line. Only a proper review of the relevant evidence and regulations can determine what actually happened. But the discussion itself still matters. It reminds everyone in the garage that modern racing is increasingly shaped by invisible decisions. A calibration, a software setting, or a technical interpretation can potentially become just as important as a physical component. That means NASCAR's credibility will depend on transparency, consistency, and the ability to explain its decisions clearly. For SVG and Larson, the rivalry will continue on the racetrack. For the teams, the competition will continue inside the engineering rooms. And for NASCAR, the responsibility is to make sure both battles are governed by the same principle. The fastest team should win because it performed better, not because it found a boundary nobody else was allowed to understand. That is the real challenge of modern motorsport. And as technology becomes more powerful, the line between innovation and regulation may become the most important race happening behind the scenes.